Did you know that the popular miniature gaming experience known by some as Warhammer 40,000 has at least 7 models in it? That's pretty cool, right? But with that dramatic breadth of designs, they can't all be good. So today, we're going to be covering some of the dumbest units in Warhammer 40k. What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and just a couple weeks ago, we talked about some of 40k's silliest units. Ones that were either silly looking, or redundant with other units, or just have rules that simply do not work in the game. Y'all seem to like that video, so today we're going to be doing it again and continuing the series. Just like last time, we won't be covering fortifications in this video because, let's face it, that's easy mode and I only tackle the most difficult of challenges. But rest assured, a video about those fortification boys will be out at some point in the not too distant future. In addition, these are all personal opinions, so if you're mad that I roasted your very favorite model, evolve better aesthetic sensibilities, I guess. And don't forget to post death threats in the comment section to increase engagement on the video. And speaking of engagement, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, do all that YouTube stuff, and maybe check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise so I can afford to feed my cat. And with that, let's jump right into the meat of this video. We're gonna start off with some vanilla boy Space Marines and talk about the Invictor Tactical Warsuit. In fairness, there are parts about this model that I like. Tactical roll bars? Check. Pretty sweet and consistent internal mechanisms? Check. A heavy bolter that can be wielded like a pistol and therefore gives the suit an actual reason to have opposable thumbs? Check. A giant open cockpit that makes no goddamn sense?
Also check.
No, just kidding. That makes the whole model look silly. That man would be shot. If this was enclosed, this model would be sweet. You can imagine a universe where they did a clear canopy that would go over this thing and kind of look like an old World War II bomber cockpit, in which case this Invictor Tactical Warsuit would actually be amazing. Unfortunately, we do truly live in the darkest timeline, and Games Workshop forgot to design that model. Instead, they designed this silly one. There's also the age-old question about how this 3-story tall walking war machine, replete with enormous smokestacks out the back and what is clearly an enormous reactor, is so stealthy enough to forward deploy. I guess it's kind of fast, being more lightly armored than a Redemptor Dreadnought, but if speed was all that allowed you to forward deploy, why wouldn't like every vehicle do that? Now, speaking of open cockpits, we can move on to another 2-legged walker in the Imperial Super faction, and that is the Nemesis Dreadnought. These things are pretty good on the table if you're a Grey Knights player, but very silly for all of the reasons that the Invictor Warsuit is dumb. I understand that there's supposed to be a magical space force field around the pilot, but to reiterate a point I feel like I've made many thousands of times on this channel, you gotta show and not tell in a miniature. Miniatures are a visual medium. If I can't see the magical space force field, I don't know it's there when I'm looking at this model. This whole aesthetic isn't helped by the fact that the pilot looks like he's just dangling there out in the front, and that the walker itself can't really bend its legs without crushing him into a pulp. So the pose of the whole vehicle is artificially static and horrible. Just a big fail for the Nemesis Dreadnought. Now we're sticking with the theme here and talking about more 2-legged walkers. Have you ever had a man ask you to choose between a set of AI-guided tank-destroying super lasers or a regular cattle prod? Even if you haven't, the rider of this next model chose the latter of those two options because we're talking about Sidonian Dragoons. Significantly less cool than an Iron Strider Ballistari that has big guns on it, this guy has a big pokey stick. It has 2 little tines on it, so I guess he could use that to roast marshmallows, which is something. It really begs the question why you would have this weird looking lance when you could just have super cool guns. Now, to be fair, that's not to say that the whole concept of these weird Adeptus Mechanicus vehicle cavalry is that bizarre. But what is bizarre is the horses that they ride. It took me a much longer period of time than I'd care to admit to realize that the Dragoons' robot horses are just men with robot legs. It's true, there's just a servitor in that who's doing the motions. He's got his legs hooked up to the Dragoon's legs, and he pilots it. So this whole model is just a man riding on top of another man. Now, I know a lot of people are into that, but the space battlefields of the grim, dark future doesn't really feel like the place to engage in that sort of behavior. I kind of feel like the Sidonian Dragoons should maybe wait until they're in their own private quarters. It's becoming a noble and vaunted tradition on this channel to call out superfluous Forge World Astra Militarum vehicles that don't really have a reason to exist, and this episode is going to be about the Malkadore. The Malkadore is a great example of a superfluous vehicle because it's mostly just a worse and more expensive Leman Russ, which would be slightly harder to kill with its very high wound count were it not for the fact that it has a worse armor save and 18 wounds is the cutoff to be seen through obscuring terrain. So in fact, it's actually much easier to kill than a Leman Russ. Not to mention the fact that for the low price of 80 points over a standard Leman Russ battle tank, you also lose the grinding advance roll, meaning that for 50% more points than the classic tank of the Militarum, you also get the exciting opportunity to deal about 50% less damage. What an absolute bargain. One of the most viewed videos on my channel is a breakdown of exactly how silly the Firestrike servo turret is. And while the mechanics have changed in the Firestrike's favor since the release of that video, my opinions on it have not. For a comparable cost to an entire unit of infantry bearing heavy weapons, this thing puts out a similar amount of damage while having basically no mobility and keywords that are just terrible for it. Not to mention the fact that the idea of putting a whole Tech Marine into what is essentially a stationary gun turret feels like an incredible waste of the chapter's specialists. Although, to be fair, it's not like Space Marines are any stranger to wasting talent.
I cannot hear a thing!
This thing also doesn't really conceptually fit the Adeptus Astartes role as elite shock troopers, and its role in the battlefield should really be superseded by tarantula batteries. Let's get some justice for my spider boys going in the 41st millennium. Change my mind, but the Firestrike servo turret should have been a Militarum vehicle this whole time. Now moving on, let's stop talking about these weird Imperial factions and start talking about some Xenos. Next up, we have almost every Necron airplane, those being the Doom Scythes and the Night Scythes, for the sole reason that why is there a cockpit for the robot pilot to drive the robot plane? If we have a robot who can pilot a plane, why not just make the plane a robot? It's not like Necrons don't have effective drone technology. That's what every single Canoptek unit in the entire range is. And a Canoptek aircraft would look super cool, as evidenced by the Night Shroud. Now, I don't know if the Night Shroud is conceptually AI piloted, but it does have an enclosed cockpit, which looks sick. What doesn't look sick are all of the Necron aircraft that have that bizarre exposed pilot seat that little guy sits in and could just be hit by shrapnel and die. Now, these exposed cockpit planes are very common among Necron vehicles, and while they kind of work for the ground stuff because they're skeletal and kind of creepy and also surrounded by quantum shielding that makes the whole thing harder to kill, that's certainly not the case for the Doom Scythe and the Night Scythe. And it appears to me, based on the fact that the Night Shroud is T7 instead of T6, having that open cockpit actually makes you significantly easier to kill. Now, that point of toughness could be representing all of the extra beef and stuff on the wings of the Night Shroud, but I'd like to believe otherwise. There are so many reasons that Necrons should not be piloting their own vehicles already, and the fact that they've hung a lampshade on that by showing you the pilot in an open-air control cubbyhole just ruins the whole model. Now, I've literally just realized that we've talked about vehicles for every entry in this video. So let's finish strong and continue that theme by talking about another vehicle. This one being the Khorne Lord of Skulls. Do you like skulls? Because this is a big tank that is also made out of skulls. It literally has skulls coming out of the joints. If you like the skulls, it has every skull. It's so many skulls, there's a lot of skulls. The tragedy of the Khorne Lord of Skulls is that it is composed of two separate vehicles that both look kind of cool. The Khitan Ravager is what you get when you put a Lord of Skulls torso on knight legs, and looks pretty sick. I don't know what you call the base of a Lord of Skulls without the top torso part. Just a big brick, I guess? An upscaled Cyclops demolition vehicle, perhaps? But that is a conversion I would like to see. I'm sure someone on the internet has done it. Please send me a picture. Either of these two separate constructions are cool independently, and when you put them together, they are significantly worse than the sum of their parts. How does the torso reach anything with its big axe when it's unable to bend on the top of this huge tank body? Why does it have these enormous vats of blood on the back in what is pretty clearly a glass container? There is no way that thing doesn't break and just ruin the insides of this vehicle with congealing ichor. 40k's demon engines tend to be pretty cool, but the Khorne Lord of Skulls is one exception. Every part of this model is just unreasonably silly and over the top. And while some may say that that does encapsulate the entirety of the 41st millennium and the setting of Warhammer 40,000, I ask the question, why does it have to be? Everything could be exactly as grimdark as it currently is without literally having skulls coming out of every crack. And I'll leave you with that thought as I wrap up the video. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know if I missed any very silly units that you think I should talk about, and if you like this video series. If you do, I'll keep talking about silly units of Warhammer 40,000. So remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.